Chosen one. There has been a pressure in your life that never announced itself as pain, yet never left you untouched. It showed up as the way you were asked to wait when others moved quickly, the way your insight arrived early, but your permission to act arrived late. Many told you this meant hesitation, fear, or immaturity. That interpretation is false. What you lived through was containment, a deliberate holding of force designed so your perception would not shatter the structure meant to carry it. The truth is stark and clear. Power released before structure is formed does not liberate, it destabilizes. In the earlier years, this containment felt like invisibility. You could see patterns in people, in systems, in outcomes, long before others acknowledged them, yet you were rarely invited to speak. When you did, your words landed too heavily or too early. It was tempting to conclude that you were simply misaligned with the world around you. But misalignment was not the cause, it was the signal. God, as architect, was shaping the internal blueprint, quietly prioritizing load-bearing integrity over speed. That decision spared you fractures you could not yet see. There were moments when restraint felt like punishment. You watched others advance while your path slowed. You sensed responsibility forming without a clear role to place it in. This is where many begin to force outcomes, to push against the unseen boundaries. You didn't. Not because you lacked courage, but because something deeper held you back. Heaven was not withholding opportunity, it was reinforcing structure. An architect does not rush the curing of foundations simply because the walls look ready. You may recognize now how early sensitivity demanded discipline before expression. Your perception was never meant to roam freely without containment. It was meant to mature inside a framework strong enough to hold consequence. This is why your formative years were marked by observation rather than influence. You were learning to carry weight without display. God was not preparing you to impress. He was preparing you to endure clarity without losing balance. Anointed one, consider how often you were placed on the edges rather than at the center. You were close enough to see everything, yet distant enough to remain unseen. That position trained discernment without entanglement. It allowed you to study cause and effect without becoming reactive. Heaven often works this way, building internal architecture through proximity rather than participation. You were present but not absorbed, watching but not consumed. Containment also taught you silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of calibration. You learned when not to speak, not out of fear, but out of respect for timing. This restraint preserved the coherence of your inner world. God, acting as architect, was aligning your internal structure with a future load that required steadiness rather than speed. Many collapse under insight because they were never taught how to hold it quietly. You might recall moments when your instincts were correct, yet you were asked to wait. That waiting refined precision. It stripped urgency from perception and replaced it with accuracy. Over time, you learned that being right is not the same as being ready. Heaven does not reward speed, it rewards stability. This is why your development occurred largely unseen. The work was internal, structural, and exacting. The unseen years were not empty. They were dense with formation. Each delay strengthened internal beams. Each unanswered question taught you how to remain present without resolution. This is not romantic language. It is structural reality. God does not improvise foundations. He designs them with foresight, knowing exactly what will rest upon them later. There is a temptation to reframe the past as wasted time. Resist that. What looks like delay from the outside often reveals itself as reinforcement from within. Your early sense of being different was not a flaw. It was evidence of a blueprint that required containment before activation. Heaven chose patience over spectacle because the outcome demanded endurance. As this chapter closes, recognize that nothing was taken from you. What felt withheld was actually protected. Your perception was preserved until your structure could hold it without distortion. God's role as architect has always been clear: form the vessel before increasing the volume. What was unseen was never absent. It was simply curing, strengthening and preparing for the next movement forward. What followed that long season of containment was not release, but calibration. The shift was subtle at first, almost easy to miss. Nothing dramatic happened on the outside. Your life did not suddenly accelerate. Instead, something internal began to settle into place. Your perception sharpened not by becoming louder, but by becoming more exact. You noticed that you no longer reacted the way you once did. You observed first. You measured. You waited. This was not detachment. It was precision forming under restraint. In this present phase, you may have felt moments of quiet friction with the world around you. Conversations felt slightly off. Decisions made by others seemed rushed or poorly aligned. You were not judging them yet, you could sense the misalignment clearly. This awareness did not come with urgency, it came with calm. Calibration does that. It removes emotional charge and replaces it with clarity. You were no longer trying to prove what you saw. You were learning how to hold it without distortion. Chosen one. This is often where confusion returns for many. When perception refines but expression remains restrained, it can feel like stagnation. You may have wondered why your insight grew while your external position stayed the same. This is where the architect's work becomes precise. God was not interested in expanding your influence yet. He was aligning your internal instruments so they would read truth accurately under pressure. Calibration always precedes movement. You might recognize this in daily moments. Someone speaks with confidence, yet their words don't quite land. You sense a gap between intention and execution. Before, this might have unsettled you. Now you simply register it. You don't correct them. You don't internalize it. You let it pass. This is restraint in practice, not silence born of fear, but silence born of accuracy. Heaven trains this quietly because it is essential for stability later. Misalignment around you became more visible during this phase, not louder, just clearer. You saw how people filled space with motion to avoid stillness. You noticed how decisions were made to relieve discomfort rather than to build coherence. This did not make you superior, it made you careful. You began to understand that seeing misalignment does not obligate you to intervene. Awareness is not assignment. God does not ask you to fix what you are only meant to discern. Anointed one. This calibration also changed how others responded to you. Some became more cautious in conversation, others grew slightly defensive without knowing why. You didn't challenge them. Your presence alone seemed to slow their speech, make them check their phrasing. This was not authority, it was coherence. When your inner structure becomes precise, it exposes imprecision around it. Not as judgment but as contrast. This is where many misunderstand what is happening. They assume their perception is causing tension. In truth, it is revealing it. Misalignment always resists precision because precision removes plausible deniability. You are not creating discomfort. You are no longer absorbing it. That difference matters. God calibrates perception so it can register reality without becoming reactive to it. During this phase, restraint becomes an active discipline. You choose not to rush clarity into action. You let insight settle. You allow time to confirm what your perception already knows. This does not make you passive. It makes you reliable. Heaven values reliability more than speed. A calibrated instrument may seem inactive, but it is simply reading accurately. You may also notice how your internal dialogue has changed. The urgency to be understood has softened. You no longer need immediate validation. You trust your perception enough to let it mature without applause. This trust did not appear overnight. It was built through repeated moments where silence proved wiser than response. God does not remove the desire to be seen. He reorders it so it no longer drives your decisions. Filtering began here as well, though gently. Not people leaving dramatically, but conversations thinning, expectations shifting. You became less available to confusion without announcing boundaries. This is what calibration produces. It creates natural filters without force. You didn't withdraw, you simply stopped compensating. And without compensation, misalignment struggles to sustain proximity. This present phase is not meant to feel triumphant. It is meant to feel steady. Calibration is not exciting, but it is decisive. It prepares perception to carry responsibility without distortion. God as architect adjusts internal alignment before expanding external reach. He ensures that what you see will not overwhelm you when action is required. As this movement completes, recognize what has changed. You are no longer asking whether your perception is valid. You are learning how to hold it with restraint. Precision is becoming natural. Silence is no longer heavy. Misalignment is visible, but it does not provoke you. This is not the end of the process. It is the point where accuracy replaces urgency and stability begins to take shape for what comes next. As calibration settled into your inner life, another movement quietly took shape: filtering. This was not something you decided to do, and it did not come from withdrawal or distance. It emerged naturally as a byproduct of precision. When perception becomes accurate, it stops accommodating distortion. You didn't harden. You didn't close off. You simply stopped adjusting yourself to keep others comfortable. That alone changed the landscape around you. You may have noticed that certain conversations no longer sustain themselves. Not because you withdrew, but because you no longer filled the gaps. Where you once explained, softened, or translated your thoughts to avoid friction, you now allowed silence to remain. This silence wasn't passive, it was informative. It showed you which interactions relied on your energy to stay afloat. Filtering begins the moment you stop compensating for misalignment. Chosen one. This phase often feels subtle but consequential. People who once felt at ease around you may now seem uncertain. They hesitate before speaking. They test the ground with extra words. This is not because you changed your behavior dramatically. It is because your internal coherence removed the room for ambiguity. When your perception is clear and restrained, it no longer absorbs emotional noise. Others feel that immediately, even if they cannot explain it. Filtering is frequently misunderstood as rejection. It is not. You are not excluding anyone. You are allowing resonance to determine proximity. When alignment is present, connection feels effortless. When it isn't, distance forms without conflict. This is not spiritual isolation in the painful sense you may remember from earlier years. It is a quieter version, one that feels clean rather than lonely. God allows this kind of isolation not to remove you from life, but to protect the integrity of what is forming within you. You might recognize this shift in practical ways. Meetings feel shorter. exchanges become more efficient. Some people stop seeking your input altogether, while others approach you with greater care. This is not status, it is signal. Your presence communicates that clarity is required here, not demanded, simply required. Heaven uses filtering to prevent unnecessary entanglement before greater responsibility arrives. Anointed One filtering also works inward. You begin to notice which thoughts deserve attention and which are residual noise. You stop rehearsing explanations that no one asked for. You stop anticipating reactions before they occur. This internal filtering frees capacity. It allows you to remain present without scanning for threats or approval. God designs this stage carefully because it strengthens focus without tightening control. There may be moments when this clarity feels stark. You see dynamics for what they are without the cushion of illusion. Someone's friendliness reveals itself as avoidance. A promise reveals itself as postponement. A plan reveals itself as self-protection. You are not disillusioned, you are oriented. Filtering removes fantasy, not hope. It clears the field so coherence can grow. Feeling different may resurface here, but with a different texture. It no longer carries the ache of not belonging. It carries the steadiness of knowing where you do and do not fit. This distinction matters. God does not erase difference to create unity. He uses difference to establish proper placement. Filtering ensures that your energy is not diluted by environments that cannot support its weight. This phase also teaches you restraint at a deeper level. You learn when not to clarify, not to confront, not to rescue conversations from discomfort. You allow others to sit with their own reactions. This is not cruelty, it is respect. When you stop absorbing what does not belong to you, you give others the opportunity to meet themselves. Heaven values this kind of restraint because it preserves agency on both sides. You may notice that trust issues arise around you more visibly now. People may seem guarded, overly careful, or strangely formal. This is not because you are unapproachable. It is because filtering removes the informal agreements people rely on to stay hidden. When those agreements dissolve, insecurity surfaces. Your role is not to manage that response. It is to remain coherent within it. God as architect allows this stage to unfold without commentary. There is no instruction to explain yourself or soften your presence. Filtering is self-explanatory. It clarifies who is aligned without argument. It prevents misalignment from attaching itself to your path. Heaven knows that clarity must be protected long before it is amplified. You may also observe that opportunities begin to reorganize themselves. Some paths quietly close without drama. Others open slowly, requiring patience rather than urgency. This is intentional. Filtering ensures that what enters your life does not require you to fragment yourself to sustain it. God is not reducing your options, He is refining them. This stage is not about isolation for its own sake, it is about preparing space. Space for responsibility, space for load-bearing decisions, space for influence that does not depend on performance. Filtering clears unnecessary complexity, so future movement does not collapse under distraction. As this chapter settles, recognize the shift that has already occurred. You are no longer trying to belong everywhere. You are allowing resonance to decide. Silence has become informative rather than awkward. Distance has become neutral rather than painful. You are not withdrawing from life, you are standing in it with coherence. Filtering is not the destination, it is the clearing before stewardship. What remains after this phase is what can endure proximity to truth without distortion. God does not rush this process because what follows requires stability. You are learning to stand without leaning, to see without intervening, to remain present without absorption. This is not detachment. It is readiness taking form. What emerges after filtering is not distance, but stewardship. This is the point where perception stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you are responsible for. You begin to understand that seeing clearly is not a privilege to display, but a charge to carry. This shift is quiet and weighty. It does not announce itself with confidence or clarity speeches. It shows up as a deeper seriousness about how you move through ordinary situations. You may notice that your presence now has an effect without intention. Rooms feel steadier when you enter. Conversations slow not because you demand attention, but because coherence introduces gravity. This is not influence in the conventional sense. It is quiet disruption. Systems built on speed avoidance or performative certainty cannot maintain their rhythm around grounded perception. You are not interrupting them. You are simply not feeding them. Chosen one stewardship requires restraint at a level deeper than silence. It is the discipline of non-participation. You no longer feel compelled to engage every misalignment you see. You recognize that some structures reveal themselves best when left untouched. This is not apathy. It is discernment shaped by experience. You have learned that intervention too early often preserves what should be allowed to collapse on its own. This is where many confuse restraint with disengagement. They assume that stepping back means you no longer care. The opposite is true. You care enough not to contaminate truth with urgency. You allow reality to speak for itself. God as architect works this way. He does not argue with instability. He removes support and lets the structure show its limits. Stewardship mirrors this approach. You hold your position and let clarity do its work. Quiet disruption becomes visible here. People may begin to reassess themselves around you. They may grow reflective, uneasy, or unexpectedly honest. This is not because you confront them. It is because your coherence removes the background noise they relied on. When excuses lose traction, awareness increases. You are not forcing awakening. You are providing conditions where distortion cannot hide comfortably. Anointed One. This phase also reshapes how you relate to responsibility. You stop mistaking awareness for obligation. Seeing does not mean fixing. Understanding does not mean carrying. You learn to let others hold the weight of their own decisions. This is not abandonment. It is respect for agency. God does not override choice simply because he sees outcomes clearly. He allows consequence to teach what instruction cannot. Absorption ends here. Earlier in life, you may have taken on emotional residue from environments that were not yours to manage. You felt drained after interactions without knowing why. Stewardship corrects this. You remain present without absorbing. You listen without internalizing. This is not emotional distance, it is structural clarity. Your inner boundaries become defined by coherence rather than defense. You may recognize this in practical settings. At work, you no longer rush to stabilize situations that are poorly designed. You offer insight when asked, but you do not prop up inefficiency with personal effort. In relationships, you stop compensating for inconsistency. You remain kind, but you do not adjust your standards to maintain connection. This is stewardship in motion. It conserves energy for what can actually grow. Spiritual awakening often gets misrepresented at this stage. It is not a surge of feeling or a sense of superiority. It is the sobering realization that your perception has consequences. You understand that clarity can disrupt lives if wielded carelessly. This awareness brings humility, not fear. You become selective, not secretive. God entrusts insight to those who can carry it without misuse. Non-participation becomes your strongest statement. When you refuse to engage in distortion, it loses momentum. This does not require confrontation, it requires consistency. You show up the same way regardless of reaction. Over time, this steadiness becomes unmistakable. Others may label it intensity or reserve, but what they are responding to is coherence they cannot negotiate with. You may feel the weight of this responsibility more acutely now. Stewardship is not glamorous. It often feels lonely because it removes you from familiar dynamics. Yet this is not the isolation of being unseen. It is the solitude of standing correctly. God does not ask you to carry this alone. He shapes your inner life to hold it without strain. Heaven reinforces internal structure, so responsibility does not become burden. There is also a subtle strengthening happening beneath the surface. Your tolerance for chaos decreases not because you are fragile, but because you no longer normalize it. You choose environments that support coherence. You withdraw from those that demand fragmentation. This selection process is not emotional, it is architectural. An architect does not place load-bearing beams in unstable soil. Quiet disruption continues to ripple outward. Systems adjust or resist. Some relationships recalibrate, others dissolve naturally. You do not chase outcomes. You remain faithful to structure. This fidelity protects what is coming. God prepares you to steward influence, not by expanding your reach prematurely, but by ensuring your stance does not shift under pressure. As this chapter draws to a close, notice the internal transition that has occurred. You are no longer merely observing misalignment. You are holding a position that does not require reaction. Stewardship has replaced vigilance. Non-participation has replaced exhaustion. Absorption has given way to coherence. This is not the end of movement. It is the stabilization that allows movement to occur without collapse. You are learning how to carry perception as responsibility rather than identity. God is still shaping the structure, reinforcing the joints, testing the load quietly. What comes next will not require you to explain yourself. It will require you to stand, and that capacity is being formed now. By the time stewardship has settled, something else becomes unmistakable. Coherence is no longer something you practice. It becomes something you live from. This is the point where non-participation stops feeling like restraint and starts feeling like alignment. You're no longer holding yourself back. You're holding your ground. The difference is subtle, but it changes how everything moves around you. You may notice that situations which once pulled you into emotional labor now pass without hooking you. Not because you have become indifferent, but because your inner structure no longer collapses under pressure. When confusion presents itself, you don't rush to clarify it. When tension surfaces, you don't rush to neutralize it. You allow reality to reveal itself at its own pace. This is coherence at work. It does not hurry truth. It makes room for it. Chosen one. This stage often brings a surprising sense of calm in environments that remain chaotic. You might still be surrounded by noise, urgency, or competing demands, yet something inside you remains steady. This steadiness is not numbness, it is alignment. God, as architect, has reinforced the internal beams enough that external movement no longer shakes the structure. You are not bracing anymore. You are bearing. Non-participation deepens here. Earlier, it was a conscious choice. Now, it is an instinctive response. You recognize when a situation is designed to extract energy rather than produce clarity. You step back without explanation. You decline involvement without justification. This is not avoidance. It is stewardship refined into habit. Heaven does not ask you to engage every battle. It asks you to remain coherent enough to recognize which ones are not yours. Absorption, which once felt unavoidable, becomes optional. You can listen to someone's frustration without carrying it home. You can observe dysfunction without internalizing it. This change does not come from detachment, but from strengthened boundaries that no longer need enforcement. Your system simply knows what belongs to it and what does not. God shapes this discernment quietly because it protects longevity. You may recognize this shift in your body before you name it intellectually. Your breathing stays even in moments that used to tighten your chest. Your thoughts remain ordered under pressure. You recover faster from interaction. These are not small indicators. They reveal that coherence has reached a structural level. Your nervous system is no longer operating in defense mode. It is calibrated for endurance. Anointed One coherence also alters how people approach you. Some may feel drawn to your steadiness, seeking grounding without knowing why. Others may keep their distance, sensing that their usual patterns will not find traction. You are not responsible for either response. Your role is not to manage perception. It is to maintain alignment. God does not assign you the task of making others comfortable. He assigns you the task of remaining true. This phase often reveals how much energy you once spent maintaining harmony that was never yours to sustain. You recall conversations where you softened truth to preserve connection, situations where you carried responsibility that belonged elsewhere. Coherence corrects this quietly. You no longer adjust your stance to stabilize environments that resist alignment. You allow them to respond to reality instead. Non-participation becomes an act of respect here. Respect for yourself, for others, and for the process that truth requires. You stop rescuing outcomes prematurely. You stop smoothing over inconsistencies. You trust that reality, when left unsupported, will organize itself according to its own integrity. God works through this principle constantly. He allows consequence to teach what intervention would only delay. You may notice that your sense of identity is changing as well. You are less defined by what you perceive and more by how you hold it. Being the one who sees no longer feels like a role to perform. It feels like a responsibility to steward. This reduces the temptation to speak unnecessarily. Silence becomes a form of accuracy rather than withdrawal. Coherence also clarifies values. You become less flexible where integrity is concerned and more flexible where preference is involved. This distinction matters. You no longer confuse adaptability with self-erasure. You can compromise on form without compromising on structure. Heaven builds this discernment because it prepares you for positions that require both firmness and humility. There may be moments when this steadiness feels isolating again, but it is a different isolation than before. It is not the loneliness of being misunderstood. It is the solitude of standing in truth without needing reinforcement. Spiritual isolation here is not absence of connection. It is freedom from distortion. God uses this space to strengthen your stance so it can carry resonance later without strain. You may also sense that your relationship with time has changed. Urgency loses its grip. You no longer feel compelled to act simply because something is available. You wait for alignment rather than opportunity. This patience is not passivity. It is precision. Heaven aligns movement with readiness, not desire. Coherence allows you to recognize the difference. As this chapter continues, you become more selective with your attention. Not everything deserves focus. Not every issue requires response. This selectivity conserves energy and protects clarity. God as architect ensures that what is preserved now will be available later when the load increases. He does not expand capacity by depletion. He expands it by stability. Notice how your inner dialogue has quieted. The need to explain yourself has faded. The impulse to justify your choices has weakened. You trust your alignment enough to let your stance speak. This trust did not appear suddenly. It was built through repeated confirmation that coherence holds under pressure. As this movement settles, understand what has been formed. You are no longer defined by reaction or resistance. You are defined by stance. Non-participation has become a form of leadership. Absorption has been replaced by discernment. Coherence has become the environment you carry with you. This is not the culmination, it is the integration. What has been shaped internally is now stable enough to interact with greater weight. God has been patient in this work, reinforcing structure before expanding influence. Heaven prepares vessels, carefully ensuring they can hold resonance without fracture. You are standing differently now. Not elevated, not withdrawn, simply aligned. That alignment is not loud, but it is unmistakable. It will matter in the movements ahead. When coherence becomes stable, capacity begins to reveal itself. This is not the sudden appearance of more responsibility, but the quiet realization that you can carry more without strain. You notice it first in small ways. Situations that once overwhelmed you now register as manageable. Decisions that used to require long internal debate arrive with clarity. Your inner structure no longer flexes under moderate load. It holds. This is where the future starts to take shape, not as an event, but as readiness. Capacity is not about ambition. It is about load-bearing integrity. God as architect does not increase weight to test you. He increases weight because the structure can now support it. This distinction matters. You're not being challenged to prove yourself. You're being trusted to stand. Chosen one. You may feel this as a subtle shift in how life approaches you. People bring more complex matters to your attention. Responsibilities arrive without urgency attached to them. You are no longer pulled into crisis mode. You are invited into steadiness. This is not coincidence. Heaven recognizes when internal alignment can hold external consequence without distortion. Load-bearing capacity is built through consistency, not intensity. The years of containment, calibration, filtering, and stewardship were not separate lessons. They were stages of reinforcement. Each one added density to your internal framework. Now, when pressure arrives, it distributes evenly instead of collapsing a single point. This is structural maturity. You might notice that your tolerance for responsibility has increased, but your tolerance for chaos has not. This is intentional. Capacity does not mean you accept everything. It means you discern what is worth carrying. God does not assign weight randomly. He assigns it according to design. When something enters your field now, it does so because it matches the structure that has been formed. Anointed one, this stage often brings a sense of quiet authority. Not authority over others, but authority over yourself. You trust your pacing. You do not rush to respond. You do not delay out of fear. You move when alignment is present. This steadiness communicates reliability without words. Others sense that you are not easily shaken, and they adjust accordingly. capacity also changes how you experience time. Deadlines feel less threatening. Waiting feels less empty. You understand that movement and stillness both serve a function. Heaven does not operate on urgency, it operates on readiness. When you internalize this, anxiety loses leverage. You stop interpreting delay as denial. You recognize it as spacing. Load-bearing integrity shows itself most clearly under sustained pressure. Short bursts of stress no longer drain you, but prolonged responsibility no longer intimidates you either. You recover without collapse. You maintain clarity without withdrawal. These are not personality traits. They are the results of structure built intentionally over time. You may see this reflected in practical contexts. At work, you can manage complexity without becoming reactive. In relationships, you can hold difficult conversations without losing balance. In solitude, you can sit with unanswered questions without spiraling. This is capacity expressed through stability. God has been preparing you for this, quietly ensuring that endurance precedes expansion. There is also a refining of desire happening here. You want fewer things, but you want them with greater precision. You are no longer drawn to roles or opportunities that require constant performance. You are drawn to positions that require presence. This shift is significant. Heaven aligns future placement with internal preference that has been purified of insecurity. Chosen one, notice how your inner voice sounds now. It is less reactive, less defensive. It does not narrate every possibility. It registers reality and waits. This internal restraint is not suppression, it is confidence in structure. You trust that when action is required, clarity will be available. God has proven this to you repeatedly. Capacity also brings a new relationship with responsibility for others. You no longer feel compelled to carry what they refuse to hold themselves. You can support without substituting. You can guide without directing. This preserves dignity on both sides. Heaven values this balance because it prevents dependency while enabling growth. You may find that your environment is slowly rearranging to match your capacity. Fewer distractions, clearer priorities, opportunities that require consistency rather than intensity. This is not luck, it is alignment. God does not place weight where it cannot be sustained. He brings increase to structures that have demonstrated integrity under lesser load. Stability becomes your defining characteristic here. Not rigidity, but reliability. People know what to expect from you because you know what to expect from yourself. This consistency creates trust without explanation. You are no longer trying to convince anyone of your readiness. Your stance communicates it. As this chapter settles, recognize the quiet strength that has formed. You are not bracing for impact. You are standing in readiness. Capacity has grown naturally out of coherence. Load-bearing integrity has replaced fragility. God's work as architect has been thorough, patient, and exact. What comes next will not feel overwhelming because you are not being asked to stretch beyond structure. You are being asked to stand within it. The future does not rush toward you. It approaches at a pace that matches your stability. Heaven moves this way, intentionally ensuring that what is entrusted can be carried without fracture. You are not waiting for capacity to arrive. You are living inside it now. The question ahead is not whether you can hold what comes, but how you will stand when resonance begins to respond to the structure you have become. As capacity stabilizes, resonance begins to answer it. This is not something you initiate. It responds to the stance you now hold. Resonance is what happens when your internal structure reaches a level where it no longer needs to announce itself. It attracts what is aligned and repels what is not without effort. You do not signal for this. You simply remain where you are and reality adjusts around you. You may notice that fewer words are required now. Explanations shorten, decisions simplify. People either understand you quickly or disengage entirely. This is not because you have become distant. It is because coherence speaks faster than language. When your inner alignment is stable, it communicates before you do. Resonance recognizes structure, not intention. Chosen one. This is where many misinterpret what is happening. They assume resonance is reward or recognition. It is neither. It is feedback. It tells you that your stance is readable. Others can sense consistency in you, even if they cannot name it. This consistency creates comfort for those who are aligned and discomfort for those who are not. You are not causing either reaction. You are simply present. Resonance also clarifies relationships. Connections that once required effort now feel natural. Those that depended on imbalance quietly fade. This does not happen through confrontation. It happens through incompatibility with coherence. When your internal rhythm stabilizes, anything that requires distortion to survive cannot keep pace. God allows this sorting not to isolate you, but to protect what is next. You might recognize resonance in how opportunities approach you. They are less flashy. They ask for reliability rather than excitement. They assume competence without demanding performance. This is a shift from proving to standing. Heaven responds to stability by offering positions that require presence more than persuasion. Resonance does not chase, it meets. Anointed one. This phase also changes how you experience influence. You no longer need to assert it. It emerges naturally from clarity. Others may reference your perspective without asking. They may adjust their behavior around you without explanation. This is not control. It is alignment responding to structure. God entrusts influence to those who do not need to use it. Resonance refines your sense of belonging as well. You no longer seek spaces where you must dilute yourself to fit. You recognize immediately when an environment can support your coherence and when it cannot. This discernment saves time and energy. Heaven values efficiency at this stage, not for productivity, but for preservation. You may also notice how your emotional landscape has steadied. Highs are less intoxicating, lows are less destabilizing. You experience life with a wider range but less volatility. This emotional regulation is not suppression, it is integration. God has aligned your internal systems so feeling does not override function. Resonance is particularly evident in how silence functions now. Silence no longer feels like absence, it feels communicative. You can sit with others without filling space. You can allow pauses without anxiety. This presence creates depth. Those who are ready lean into it. Those who are not retreat. Neither response requires your management. Chosen one. Notice how your sense of self is no longer tied to reaction. You do not measure alignment by how others respond to you. You measure it by whether you remain coherent under response. This internal metric keeps you steady. Heaven establishes this standard so your stance does not depend on affirmation or resistance. Resonance also changes your relationship with authority. You respect it where it is earned. You are indifferent to it where it is performative. This discernment is not rebellious, it is architectural. You recognize structures that can carry weight and those that cannot. God trained your perception for this purpose, not to criticize, but to place yourself correctly. You may find that your voice carries more weight now, even when you speak less. When you do offer input, it lands cleanly. Not because it is forceful, but because it is aligned. Resonance amplifies coherence without exaggeration. It does not need volume, it relies on accuracy. This stage can feel deceptively quiet. There is no dramatic shift, no clear milestone. Yet beneath the surface, positioning is occurring. People, roles, and responsibilities are rearranging themselves subtly. Heaven moves pieces into place without spectacle when stability is present. Noise is unnecessary when structure holds. Anointed One, you may also sense a deepening trust in your own pacing. You no longer feel rushed by others' timelines. You are not threatened by faster movement elsewhere. You understand that resonance responds to stance, not speed. This trust frees you from comparison. You are not late, you are aligned. Resonance does not guarantee ease. It guarantees fit. What comes into your life now will require consistency rather than urgency. It will ask you to remain who you are under sustained engagement. This is why stability was essential. God does not connect you to what would fracture you. He connects you to what matches your structure. As this chapter draws to a close, recognize the quiet confirmation taking place. You are not waiting to be chosen. You are standing in a way that can be recognized. Resonance is not something you pursue. It is something that responds when structure and stance are clear. You are not becoming louder, you are becoming legible. And what can be read clearly does not need to announce itself. What remains is to see how this stance will be held when the future begins to apply real weight. That movement is already forming, and it will meet you where you stand, not where you imagine you should be. What remains now is not movement, but stance. Not anticipation, but integration. The work that shaped you did not aim to make you impressive. It aimed to make you stable, and stability is quiet. It does not announce itself or demand recognition. It holds. This is where everything you've lived through begins to sit together without friction. Past restraint, present coherence, and future capacity no longer feel like separate phases. They form a single posture. You may notice that you are no longer asking what comes next with urgency. The question has softened into readiness. You are not scanning the horizon for signs. You are attending to where you stand. This is not indifference, it is trust in structure. God as architect does not rush transitions when the foundation is sound. He allows the weight of reality to arrive naturally, knowing it will be met without collapse. Chosen. One stance is not rigidity, it is responsiveness without reactivity. You are not frozen in place, you are rooted. When something enters your life now, it does not knock you off balance. You feel its weight, assess its fit, and respond accordingly. This discernment is not effortful, it is the result of integration. What once required vigilance now operates quietly in the background. You may sense how your internal world has simplified, not in depth, but in friction. Competing impulses have resolved. The need to justify yourself has diminished. You no longer rehearse explanations for choices you trust. This clarity is not arrogance. It is alignment settling into habit. Heaven designed this stage so that responsibility could be carried without constant self-interrogation. Anointed One integration also changes how you relate to uncertainty. Unknowns no longer provoke anxiety. They register as neutral space. You understand that not all clarity arrives before commitment. Some clarity forms as you remain present. This patience is not passive, it is informed by experience. You have seen enough outcomes unfold to trust the process that precedes them. You may also notice that your sense of purpose feels less like a destination and more like a way of standing. Purpose no longer demands dramatic expression. It reveals itself in consistency, in how you show up when no one is watching, in how you handle responsibility that comes without applause. God shapes purpose this way because it must endure beyond seasons of attention. Stance also brings a new relationship with effort. You no longer overextend to prove value. You apply energy where it produces coherence, not where it feeds distortion. This selectivity is not selfish, it is structural. An architect does not waste material. Heaven directs effort precisely so that what is built can last. You might recognize how your inner boundaries now feel natural rather than enforced. You do not need to remind yourself what you will or will not tolerate. Your system recognizes misalignment immediately and adjusts without drama. This is not avoidance. It is clarity functioning at a structural level. God has reinforced this instinct so you can move through complex environments without constant negotiation. As integration completes, you may feel a subtle widening of capacity again. Not because something new is demanded, but because something old no longer consumes space. Energy once spent managing tension is now available for presence. Attention once fragmented is now focused. This is how future responsibility makes room for itself. It does not arrive as an addition, it arrives as a replacement for what is no longer needed. Chosen. One, notice how your relationship with silence has transformed. Silence is no longer something you endure. It is something you inhabit. It does not feel empty, it feels complete. In that silence you sense support without instruction. Heaven does not speak constantly, it stabilizes. God's involvement is evident not in constant reassurance, but in the reliability of the structure He has formed within you. You may also sense that your impact no longer depends on proximity. Even when you are not present, the way you stand influences what follows. People adjust decisions after interacting with you. Systems recalibrate subtly. This is not control. It is resonance sustained over time. God allows influence to extend this way when it is rooted in integrity rather than intention. Integration also tempers ambition. You still care about what you contribute, but you are no longer driven by comparison. You do not measure success by visibility. You measure it by whether your stance remains intact under pressure. This internal metric keeps you aligned regardless of outcome. Heaven values this because it protects you from chasing roles that would compromise structure. As this journey settles, recognize what has been completed. You are no longer becoming ready. You are ready enough to stand where you are. Readiness does not mean certainty. It means stability in uncertainty. God has not promised outcomes. He has prepared you to carry whatever aligns without losing coherence. There is no dramatic ending here, no final declaration. Just a quiet sense that you are no longer bracing for life. You are participating without absorption. You are present without tension. This is not the end of movement. It is the beginning of a different quality of movement, one that does not require you to announce itself. If something in this journey resonated with you, you are welcome to mark that recognition in whatever way feels honest. A reflection, a few words, or simply staying connected as this path continues to unfold. There is no urgency here, only alignment, and alignment always knows when to return.